Like today's guest, I am really concerned for the safety of women and girls. And at the same time, I felt struck by the incredible absence of care inside of the men who are involved in supporting the trend of sex dolls. I really wish men would care more about each other to overcome this apparently growing industry. And I wish more men cared about women and girls enough to help prevent these extreme and distorted male behaviors in our culture. Today's guest, Caitlin Roper, brings a difficult topic that is not easy to be present to. So if you are a survivor of sexual abuse, please only listen to this when you're feeling resourced enough to do so. You may like to connect with a friend after or even listen together. Afterwards, it could help to move emotional charge through your system by going for a walk or a run or whatever you need. Maybe smudge yourself. Caitlin is a really articulate speaker who is well researched, grounded, and cares about the future of humanity. And I want to thank you also for caring by listening to this episode. Welcome, everyone, to this provocative and heartfelt podcast, Beyond Patriarchal Sex, a place for both women and men to elevate ourselves, finding out what it takes to live beyond our conditioning and assumptions, not only for ourselves, but also for the coming generations. My name is Devashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these conversations. So it's Robert Jensen, who I spoke with in episode 3, who suggested that you and I connect, Caitlin. So hi to Robert, and thanks to Robert. And I've been aware of Collective Shout for many years, actually. And so I'm really happy to make a connection with you today. Thanks for meeting with me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's nice that Robert recommended us. I really respect and admire Robert and his work so much. He's a wonderful man, and I feel like I learned so much from him and his work.
Yeah, yes, me too, me too. And Caitlin, I'll share a bit about your professional bio and I'll put more about it in the show notes as well. So, everyone, Caitlin Roper is an activist, writer, and campaigns manager at Collective Shout for a world free of sexploitation, a grassroots um, organization campaigning movement against the objectification of women and the sexualization of girls in media, advertising, and popular culture. And Caitlin has a university qualifications in music, sociology, anthropology, and is currently a PhD candidate researching female-bodied sex dolls and robots. How'd I do with that, Caitlin?
Oh, that's pretty good. It's a little bit updated. I actually discontinued the PhD and wrote a book instead. And,
Oh, I see.
yeah, and now I'm doing a master's in counseling, so I've kind of taken a different turn. But
Okay, gotcha.
I have an
Okay, thanks
interest
for
in
letting
sex
me
dolls and
know. Yes. So I often ask the guests here this question right at the beginning of what's your initial interpretation of what patriarchal sex is, if you would describe that?
I think, I suppose I would say it's relations, maybe sexual relations between the sexes that replicate patriarchal power structures. So, whether that's relationships premised on unequal power dynamics, male dominance and female subordination, or relationships or sexual relationships that prioritize male desire and pleasure and sexual preferences at the expense of the woman's, or even just the power dynamic where men are seen as humans and women are seen as less than human. It's sort of like women being objectified and seen as objects or things to be sexually used or for men's use and entertainment and sexual gratification.
That is the most informative and awesome answer we've had so far. So thank you for that. And what do you see that it's like for women? Because it's really just elaborating on what you've already said, I guess. What is it like for women in the paradigm of patriarchal sex in general, including in that intimacy and relationship in general as well?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, honestly, I do think it's probably difficult for both men and women in this day and age. But speaking as a woman and with, a lot of female friends and being in the space of dating and relationships and everything, like it's pretty awful right now, I think. I think a lot of women they would love to form meaningful relationships with men, to settle down and maybe get married and have a family or just or whatever they want, but it's very difficult for them to find men who I suppose want the same thing and also see them as worthy and deserving of respect and who see their full humanity. I think a lot of men have been raised on internet porn and that's really distorted their view of women and their view of relationships and how they should be. And not that that's the only factor, but I think it's a pretty significant factor these days that so many women are just feeling quite overwhelmed and a little bit hopeless and a bit of despair around trying to meet with men and partner with men because I guess I'll just say the pickings are slim.
Mm, I think many women would agree with your answer. And like you said, Caitlin, everyone is suffering and struggling under this patriarchal power structure and everything that that's created and everything it hasn't created, saying that. And I love and respect that you have a focus on advocating for women and girls in particular. So, what's your motivation for that?
Well, I mean, there's where to begin, really. I mean, part of it is based on my own experiences growing up as a woman or as a girl, and seeing, some of the things that happen to girls and to women, and realizing that they are not, that they for me were not just my individual experiences, but things that happen to women in general, that they are female experiences. So those kind of things, and then the fact that I have children myself, I have daughters, and I'm mindful of their well-being and what I want for them in their futures. And I suppose just all the things that I've seen in this work, the ways that women do experience sexual abuse, exploitation, and violence at the hands of men primarily, and that women deserve better, that women deserve to be able to live their lives in the way that they want and to live free of this kind of abuse and exploitation. And probably particularly because I'm in this space and doing this work, I get maybe a magnified view of that. I hear stories from people that perhaps they may not share with the general public or with their other friends or family members, but I see these kind of things, this patriarchal these dynamics, and in the form of violence and abuse and things like that, in so many women's lives. So I feel like it's really common, and I don't actually know of any women who haven't had any kind of experiences of abuse or harassment or violence at the hands of men. So because this is so common and it's not okay, and there's got to be another way, right? Like this isn't normal. Just because it's been normalized doesn't mean that it should stay that way or that it has to stay that way. I do believe that things can change, but it's how and that whole process and what that looks like.
Oh my gosh, thank you for saying that so clear. I thoroughly agree with you. Just because it's normalized does not mean it's normal or natural, right?
Mm,
Yes. And you you said something disturbing but true and not at all unfamiliar to any woman listening, that you don't know any woman who hasn't experienced some level of at least harassment or abuse. And that is the time that we're living in on this planet. And it's been that way for a really long time. And this is one of the key things that I intend for listeners to see very clear and not back away from, because this is a primary driver of why I do the work that I do, why you do the work that you do, and why everyone who's going out on a limb to, express and educate on difficult topics. This is why we're doing it, right?
And it's a really uncomfortable reality. And it's confronting and uncomfortable sometimes for men to hear as well. And that's not to say that they personally have perpetrated this kind of violence or something like that, but I think they have to be uncomfortable sometimes just to hear this is the reality for so many women. These are our experiences. Like it might be hard to hear, but it's really hard to live it too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of my key points for men to hear from this project, from this podcast, is that just knowing that you aren't one of those men who are perpetrating these behaviors is no longer sufficient, truly, in terms of being a protector. It's no longer sufficient to just not identify with that. There is a need to advocate for protection, to teach men how to respect women and girls and boys, of course, as well, and themselves, because it comes down to that, you know. So, Caitlin, the work that you have been focusing on with the sex dolls is so specific. And I have listened to a number of your interviews and what you have to share on this. And I have to admit that I only had a pretty vague idea about the whole sex doll scene until I encountered you. So could you
Sorry
share?
about that.
Yes, it's a disturbing reality. So why have you decided to highlight this to the extent of, yeah, I mean, even though it's not relevant now, you consider doing a PhD on the subject. You've written a book on this subject. You are such a powerful and articulate voice on this subject. So why have you decided to focus on this?
I think I saw it as an emerging form of technology that I thought this is going to become more prevalent, which we are seeing. I thought it's sort of like a new form of pornography. It's a form of pornography that's 3D kind of interactive. So men are actually able to act out rather than watching and consuming in that way. They are more physically involved. So I thought this is a really interesting concept. I thought we're seeing these products more, they're becoming more popular. And also, I think it was just around the time of COVID as well that I was doing a lot of research on this. So then they really escalated in popularity because a lot of men wanted to order them then. And I just thought this is something that needs to be explored. I started to engage with some of the research literature on the topic, which is still, there's not a lot of empirical data out there just because it is quite new, the topic or this phenomenon. But what I found was that so much of it was very pro, very much like these are great. These products will be so great. They'll promote health and well-being, and they will, they could be used by people with disabilities or people who are elderly or people who are lonely or suffer from social anxiety. What they didn't say was men, that men with these things going on. But there was always a very gender neutral approach, as if because what is actually happening is these products are overwhelmingly female bodied, whether that's in the form of a woman or a little girl, and the buyers are almost exclusively men. So we have to be talking about it in a way that does acknowledge that reality. This is not a gender neutral topic. This is a highly gendered topic and a reproduction of this patriarchal, these sort of power structures again. So first of all, the deliberate sort of glossing over that reality, I thought that was pretty significant. And then the fact that they were being sort of thrown out as, oh, these are great, they're going to solve all these problems and no one will be lonely and all these things. And I was like, hold up. No one is talking about the potential harms to women and girls. No one is talking about this further objectification, the literal objectification of women and girls, or this promotion of male sexual entitlement, like anything a man desires sexually, well, he should be able to have it. So it's this idea like, well, he wants to be able to have violent and sadistic sex and his wife doesn't want to, well, we'll give him a doll, or he wants to practice child sexual abuse and he can't, well, they'll make a doll for that. So it's sort of like if a man wants any kind of sexual act, this is the way to accommodate it rather than saying maybe some of these sexual acts that are premised on violence and abuse and dehumanization or illegal things, maybe we shouldn't actually encourage that. So what I was seeing in the research literature was this is great, these would be really good, and no consideration of how these could contribute to men's violence against women, how they furthered the objectification of women, what in terms of rape culture, all these things. So I think that was when I when I really came across this literature and saw that it was so one-sided and so pro men's supposed sexual rights with so little consideration of women and girls' human rights that I thought, I think this needs to be exposed. People actually need to understand what's going on, what the conversations are, and yeah, just that this exists, this is a thing, and it's a growing market. And the fact that, as I've touched on already, that this is not just adult women being objectified in this way, but children, primarily little girls, but even toddlers and infants. So the idea that this is some sort of positive development, that this is beneficial or promotes health and well-being, I just thought I cannot, know that this exists and not say anything. So I just felt I've got to expose this. I've got to write about it. People need to know what is happening. And I'm really angry and I need to get out my anger by actually doing something productive. So that was, writing the book. That was for me a way to feel like I was doing something and hoping that by, highlighting this issue and what's going on, that I might be able to get other people on board and, to speak out against this trade in sex dolls and sex robots.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm not going to lie. This is getting into some disturbing territory that really brings up disgust in my body and my heart. So I imagine others listening will feel the same. This lack of questioning male sexual entitlement and urges. The, this is just outrageous to me and to you and many others, and yet it's assumed and it's normalized by so many. What do you think is going on there, Caitlin?
Well, I think part of it is that academia is dominated by men who have an interest in preserving men's supposed sexual rights, with very little concern for women and girls. But I'll give you an example. So, one of the writers in this space, he wrote, I believe it was a book chapter on the topic of sex robots for men or for people, even I don't know that he said men. But he basically made the argument that when young men in particular don't have access to sex, they can become a significant source of social instability. So, when you look at the potential cost, like it's actually better that these men have like access to a sex doll or a sex robot. And then he even used the term sexual inequality. And he used that not to refer to, the genocide of many, many women around the world or like the mass rapes or things like that, the things that women experience, the human rights violations on the basis of being female in this world. But he used it to refer to men not getting all the sex they wanted, that there's sexual inequality, and that's because men want to have sex. They want to have sex in the ways they want it, as often as they want it. And if they don't have that, they are sexually deprived. So that right there, I mean, that's incel ideology, the idea that men have a right to sex and that sex means sexual access, usually to a woman's body. And if that's not available, then we need to create replica women's bodies for men to use because that is their right. They are being denied their right if they can't have access to a female body for sexual gratification. So when these are the kind of arguments being made, it's pretty clear that there's a particular ideology there, and it's not concerned with human rights or men's violence against women or any of these things. It's really just this idea, well, men want it, they should be able to have it, with no consideration of why that may not necessarily be a good thing.
As though enacting those things out were their only option. The tremendous lack of education and the upholding of this unquestioned patriarchal power structure is thankfully becoming outdated, and thanks to people like yourself who are really putting yourself on the line to speak up for something so damn important. So again, thank you for everything that you're doing.
But that's a really good point that you make, just the idea that if men want it, they have to have it. There's no consideration, or maybe they don't. Maybe the fact that they want to do something isn't just, it's not a given that they should have to do that or be able to do that. That the idea that if men have a desire to engage in aggressive sex or child sexual abuse, that maybe we say, hey, No, we actually don't encourage that. Let's look at that. What's going on there? Let's work on that. Let's find another way rather than, well, they want it. Let's find a way to accommodate those violent or abusive sexual desires. It's like it's not even a thought that maybe we don't do that. Maybe we don't encourage that. It's like, oh, well, if men want it, they have to have it. And like that's a very limited way of thinking.
Wow, and it's an incredibly immature way of thinking. Like you're highlighting that there is obviously no true masculine leadership, no developed male voice of authority coming into the picture there. It's a very immature place for a man to be psychologically, emotionally, sexually. And apart from the very obvious abuse of women and girls within this, I actually see it as abuse to men to allow this to be encouraged. And I'm wondering if, aside from this ideology that you've mentioned, Caitlin, the people that are advocating for this and coming up with ridiculous reasons and excuses to justify this industry, do they stand to financially profit from what they're saying?
That's a good question. In the academics, I don't know that that's the case. I think it's more the ideology that they align with and that sort of works for them and their interests. Definitely, there are people in the trade who are involved in sort of selling and things like that who make some of these same arguments. So there often is, I think, an incentive there. But just to the point about um, the harm to men. So a lot of my work, primarily focuses on the harms to women because they are so significant. But something that I probably talk about a bit less is how these products, whether we're talking about sex dolls and sex robots or AI, which I'm sort of more interested in at the moment, or pornography, how all of these things harm men. So all of those are at odds with actual human connection and intimacy. So they undermine men's capacity for genuine connection and intimacy because they're all one-sided sex acts. So we're talking about manufactured products that are designed for, again, overwhelmingly men's sexual arousal and gratification. And none of these are tools for actually improving sexual relations and intimacy. They're profit driven. We're talking about industry selling products that are often quite addictive, not to enhance our sexual lives and relationships, but to make money. And there's these trends as well for violence and dehumanization because it's sort of like, what's the most intense? What's going to get men excited? What's going to keep their attention? I think it's actually Robert Jensen who made the point really well that what porn gives men is, quick, reliable orgasms. So these, whether we're talking about porn or sex dolls, they're both being marketed as sort of being able to meet all of men's needs. And when we say needs, they're not really needs, they're sexual desires or preferences. But both pornography and sex dolls, they are all about the man's own sort of selfish experience. There's no mutuality, there's no consideration of another person's needs or feelings or pleasure or pain. And as hard as they try, men can never achieve human intimacy or connection with an object or a screen. So these technologies are driving disconnection and loneliness, whether the user is masturbating to porn or using a sex doll or chatting to a virtual AI girlfriend, they're alone. They're not connected. And these technologies often actually get in the way of them forming meaningful human relationships because the user prefers the ease of the technology or the dopamine hit that they get from porn or whatever it is that they're using. So these men are choosing non-human objects instead of actual partnerships or intimate relationships with another human. So while I do tend to focus on the harms to women and girls because that's my area, that's what is really of most interest to me, and because those harms are so significant. But I just do want to make that point as well. These things are really bad for men as well.
If you are a woman who wants to live beyond patriarchal sex, you're going to love the Tigress Path. It's primal feminine spirituality with deep somatic teachings and female embodiment practice. Currently, we have classes online and in person. There's the annual Tigress Bali retreat and more. So reach out on social media or go to thetigresspath.com for details. 100%. And I have a lot of things to say, even just on general pornography, which is, for the majority of it, violence against women and
Mm.
human trafficking disguised as consensual experiences. So yeah, there is no relational experience in the screen and the object, like you've said. There's no empowerment for boys and men to become confident and secure in themselves and learn how to be healthy, to learn how to be happy, learn how to have successful relationships. And the lack of that is such a big factor behind suicide, which is happening at a pretty alarming rate. So that's one of the main points I intend to transmit with this project, because as I don't know if you know the therapist and author Terry Real, he says it's really coming down to the enlightened self-interest of one
Mm.
individual to see how advocating for someone else's well-being is actually in favor of your own. And that's a
Mm.
level of relational education that is entirely missing when it's just the screens and the objects being marketed to men and boys, which is an enormous disservice to them and makes me so angry and protective on behalf of boys, actually, in particular, and angry at the men who don't speak up for this themselves, because essentially this is between men and men.
Mm. Taking it all in.
And like you've said, Caitlin, the advocacy focusing on women and girls, which you are doing. And I'm so freaking grateful for that, because it's obviously incredibly important and so close to my heart personally as well. So, this eroticizing of girls, in teen porn and of child exploitation material, child abuse material, this is unfortunately showing up in the sex dolls market as well, isn't it?
That's right. There's a market for what I call child sex abuse dolls. They're often referred to in media as child sex dolls, but I think it's important to make it clear that these are for practicing sexual abuse. So I've come across probably hundreds of these dolls in the last few years as I've been researching this topic. They are almost always female bodied. I've seen about a handful of dolls modeled on boys, but they're almost always modeled on little girls and little girl toddlers and infants. So what we're seeing is that these are very lifelike. They come with penetrable orifices, usually vaginal, anal, and the mouth, and they're designed to accommodate an adult male's penis. So it's really awful that these products exist to start with, and it's really quite confronting to have this conversation. I think a lot of people would almost rather not know, and I really understand that because it is quite upsetting. But I also feel strongly that we do need to talk about this. We need to be aware that this is happening right now. For example, Collective Shout. We have a campaign against Temu to get these products off their platform because they are so often sold on mainstream platforms. We've had campaigns to get them off Etsy, Made in China, Shein, Amazon. I can't even keep them all in my head at the moment, but we've found them on all these platforms and we've run campaigns to get them taken down because in Australia, these products are illegal. They constitute illegal child sexual abuse material. And in some countries, some other countries as well, they have criminalized them. But it's as you know, the technology keeps advancing, the laws don't necessarily catch up in time. They take time. So some American states, they have criminalized them, but not all of them. So it's quite complicated in that sense. But what they are is they are replica little girls designed for men's on-demand sexual use and abuse. And you hear some advocates for the dolls arguing, well, again, it's better that the men have the dolls than, abuse an actual child. But first of all, that's not even what's happening because when you think about it logically, the idea that we say, okay, we don't want men to sexually abuse little girls or children in general, let's give them a replica child to practice on. It doesn't make logical sense. Like it's encouraging the behavior rather than saying, you know what? Maybe you don't want to sexually abuse a child. Maybe you can consider, what child sexual abuse does to a child, how harmful and devastating it is. And do you know what I mean? Like sort of go the other way and encourage restraint and therapy. And do you know what I mean? But instead, what is
100%.
happening? Yeah, what is happening is we're seeing this normalization where it's like, let's just give them a doll, or they should be entitled to a doll, and that will actually be protective for children. But it's not. It's normalizing and legitimizing men's sexual abuse of children. And what I've found in my research over the last few years, I've been tracking media cases where men are found and charged with child sexual abuse doll offenses. And almost every single time, they are already sexually offending against children. They are usually found with other child sexual abuse material, or CSAMs. This is images or videos of children being sexually abused and raped. And some of them also use their dolls to sort of, how do I put it, to, I suppose, sexually exploit children in new ways. So there's been cases in Australia where, okay, in Victoria, there was a case where a primary school teacher was found with child sex abuse dolls, where he had taken his students' school photos and cut them out to make masks to put on the dolls. So where people say, oh, it's not a real child, but these are new ways that real children can be exploited and can be harmed, even if they're not in the room. Like, and that there's just, yeah, it's so much more complicated than the one or the other, either or. It doesn't really work like that. And what it does is fuel the demand for children for sexual abuse and for CSAM, and just really encourage this. And we're seeing services as well where some child sex abuse doll websites offer to customize dolls in the likeness of a known child. So a man can send in a photo of a child known to him, and they will make a doll based on that child. So there's so many ways, rather than actually protecting children, that this fuels harm and abuse to children. So it just opens up many more ways that children can be abused and sexually exploited. But you have those people, some in academia and some in lobby groups, who are arguing that these dolls should be made legal and that they're just sex toys like any other. And really, but it's so backwards. But yeah, this is happening at all, that we have to have this conversation at all, and that we have to argue and defend for these laws that we have against these products.
Is actual insanity, is how it occurs to me. And I'm so glad that you highlighted that there is actual evidence to prove that a man engaging with a sex doll, either woman or child, is woman or girl, is actually creating the behavior. Because how could it not? How could enacting it out not normalize the experience for them, to give them even more confidence to go ahead and do that with actual live people? And
Absolutely.
Caitlin, I know that there is probably quite a lot of somatic science research, evidence out there of, in embodiment coaching, even sport coaching, the intentional in acting out, whether it's internally as a mental picture or physically as a movement process, that there is an entrainment experience taking place in the body mind system to pattern in a certain experience. And people, use that for success in Olympic level sports or whatever else. And I know that there's a lot of science backing that being valid. So how could that not apply to something like this? Like, it's actually insane.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think also on that is that there's this documented tendency, particularly if we talk about pornography, towards escalation. So maybe someone starts viewing a certain kind of porn, and at a certain point, it's like, yeah, it doesn't really do it for me anymore. I need something a little bit more intense, just, and it sort of escalates in terms of the content. And that's a documented thing. And in some cases, men who do consume child sexual abuse material, they started with adult porn. So that was a process, like an escalation process, where at a certain point they wanted something harder, they wanted something more extreme, and that's where they ended up. And that's not necessarily the case for everyone who consumes porn. I'm not saying that, but there is that escalation that can be documented. So when we're talking about sex dolls and child sex abuse dolls, already acting out on a sex doll is a form of escalation, because if we look at, for example, consuming CSAM, child sexual abuse material, where the viewer is, they're watching, they've gone from watching to purchasing a doll to acting out physically on a doll. So it's gone from thoughts to behaviors. So it just sort of bridges that gap between consuming CSAM to acting out physically on a child, because you've got that step in the middle of acting out physically on a replica child. So it just sort of like takes you further along that progression.
Yes, and that escalation that you've just described, if I read that thematically, that's an increasing level of dissociation that allows them to become more and more disconnected, more and more depraved, more and more dehumanizing in what they're wanting and what they're desiring. And from what I understand, even just when it comes to online screen porn, that algorithm is designed to escalate that process itself. But the internal somatic process is allowing that through the experience of dissociation, meaning that then they're not present. There is no relational experience for there to be any kind of container for them to feel their feelings and experience their sensations, which drives them to more and more hardcore, more intense things because they're trying to feel something. And an alternative, like we said before, like therapy and exploring eroticized wounds could really help to de-escalate this internal tendency. Yeah, so dare I ask you, what has been some of the most disturbing things that you've discovered in your research about the sex dolls?
Oh, that's a good question. What has been some of the most disturbing? I think one of the most disturbing things would probably be toddler sex dolls modeled on actual children. So just the reality that this is an industry that not only creates replica children for men to practice child rape and sexual abuse, but that some of these are made in the likeness of actual children. I have spent many hours on online forums, including pedophile forums, in the process of doing research for the book. And I remember one guy describing how there was a girl in his care. He wasn't clear, but I thought maybe it was a friend's child or maybe like a niece or something like that. A child in his care at times who he had a close relationship with, and that he had purchased a sex doll made to look like this girl, and how he would dress the doll in things, clothing items, sort of like the little girl would wear, and the way that he would make this doll as close as he could to the girl, and then use this doll and say that this is a good thing, that he was, that, that this is how he sort of managed his desires for this child. Or another man who wrote in a review something about how he really liked this certain doll because it was modeled on about a 4-year-old. And he said he really enjoyed it because it looked just like his best friend's daughter. So it's when you see very clearly that the men who use these products are predators, and that, again, they're not limited to the dolls, but that they are in the world and they interact with real girls, real children in the world, and how they see these girls and the things they want to do to them and may do to them. So it's just that, I suppose, that acknowledgement, that understanding that in one sense, for me, I try and put all this in a bit of a box. It's sort of theoretical. That's how I have to frame it in my mind to do this work and not think too deeply about in reality what this looks like. But sometimes you just get that reminder, like, that's right, these are real men in the real world with access to real girls. And just that sort of uh, understanding of reality, that these are real threats, these men are real threats to real girls.
Wow, what incredible lengths you've gone to for this research. And, I just so wish that there was real, and, there is some, but more real male leadership to show men how to reconnect with their feelings, how to be able to feel something without it going to these extremes, how to be able to feel their power in their body, how to feel, the aliveness that comes to them from real connection and from being protectors of women and girls, and the power that can come to them through that. and the power of experiencing a real healthy connection with a woman that is connected to her feelings and in her body. Like, this is some of the many things that these guys are missing out on. And obviously, I mean, I have an assumption that predators, sexual predators, have been abused themselves and are probably enacting out their own trauma that was done to them. So the amount of trauma healing that it takes and recovery to undo that patterning, which some pockets of society are unfortunately encouraging and saying that your urges, all of your desires are welcome and possible, and here are all the ways to enact them, rather than caring about that individual man's well-being, to be able to bring him back to reality, to bring him back to connection with his heart, and not be part of the ongoing generational trauma problem. It's just so sad that that's not as readily available, as the manufacturing of these ridiculous sex dolls made into the likeness of real women and children, even infants, which literally makes me feel sick to even have to say that out loud.
And men, the men who use these dolls, many of them prefer their doll to an actual woman. There are men who have wives and prefer their doll to their wife. It's like you read about men who prefer porn to their actual relationship, to their girlfriend, their wife, their partner. I had, in my book, I shared the accounts of a number of women whose husbands had purchased sex dolls. And, the complex feelings that they had about that, the humiliation of feeling that they weren't good enough, they weren't desirable enough, they couldn't compare to this perfect pornified doll that was, had this very porn aesthetic kind of body and appeared to be very young and was always available for sex. And women reporting that their men preferred the doll to them, that they would rather have sex or use the doll than to have sex with their partner. So when you think how backwards this is, when men have loving wives and partners there, and that they would prefer the inauthentic, cold, soulless experience of penetrating a silicon doll rather than having a loving wife and family. It's just, how far have we fallen that this is the reality for a growing number of men, where they prefer a silicon doll that doesn't talk back, that doesn't have any needs or autonomy or feelings, but just exists for their on-demand sexual use. And that's what they want.
No capacity for consent, obviously, in there as well.
Right.
If men listening to this are not fuming right now, I would suggest that they oh, become more connected to their hearts and their bodies, because, I mean, women like yourself can take on such a serious and big topic like this, and the incredible woman who's basically taking out Pornhub right now, doing amazing work to, really lead the way forward with that. Why are women having to take on these roles? You know,
It's a good question. I know, obviously in this space, I know so many women who are doing amazing work, often at great personal cost. It's difficult. There's trauma around it. There's our own experiences bumping up against the work we're doing. And it's painful, I think, to be constantly aware of, well, I suppose how much so many men hate us and see us as less than human and see us as just things to be used. And
yes,
just be aware of that all the time. It's really painful. So, yeah, it'd be great to see more men in this space. I do know some excellent men in this space, not
yes,
enough,
yeah,
unfortunately. Probably about a handful, if that, of men who I think this is someone who is genuine, who I think is trustworthy, who is doing this work and doing it for the right reasons and not sort of for their own self kind of image or to think they're pretty good or something. But yeah, so
yes.
we do need more men who are, and yeah, who are concerned with the interests of women and girls and our human rights.
Yes, and the future of humanity. And there are some, which is incredible, but not even nearly enough. So in terms of that drive for, leadership and masculinity and, you know, the warrior spirit. Please, please, men, step into this space. Please, anyone listening. This is basically uh, at such an extreme place already. And to add to why this is so damn important, I have listened to a few of your other interviews, Caitlin, and I heard you mention something super disturbing, which is that the child dolls are programmed to cry in pain.
So there are some dolls, well, depending on the doll seller, for example, the user can select, well, they can customize all kinds of features. They can customize the body type, the hair color, eye color, right down to freckles and fingernails and all of these kind of things. So some doll sellers offer the option to choose a facial expression. So a doll could be neutral, it could have an expression of smiling, it could appear to be crying or in pain. I've seen some sort of like grimacing or with even sort of to look like they have tears and are crying. So all of those things are to aid in the user's fantasy that perhaps that it's either a child who is smiling and enjoying being abused, or else it's a child who is crying and resisting and in pain, and that's their particular fantasy they want. It's about that sadistic abuse of children. So basically, any fantasy that these men have can essentially be catered to. And as we can see, some of them are incredibly sadistic and violent and, yeah, just depraved.
Wow, wow. And so I'd love for you to paint a bit more of a clear picture of the actual objects, because when we say dolls, people might immediately think, the dolls they had in their childhood or saw their sister have or whatever. It's not like that, is it, Caitlin? These are life size, extremely realistic, very human-like objects, yeah?
They're really hyper realistic. So, excuse me. So again, it depends where the customer goes. Some of them are sort of more obviously cheaply made and more generic and everything, but others, they are so incredibly lifelike. And they're typically made out of silicon. Some of them have movable joints. They have like a skeleton kind of thing. They have their hair. They have all these facial features, which are really, really human-like. Like I said, they come with their penetrable orifices as well, and they're life size. So the child dolls, typically smaller because they're children, but they really do. They're designed to look and feel like women and children, and designed as much as possible to sort of replicate that experience of having sex with or sexually abusing a woman or child. So they are surprisingly realistic.
Oh my God. And excuse my ignorance, but could you explain the difference of the sex dolls of that kind that you described and the sex robots?
Sure. So basically, what we really have now are sex dolls. So, sex robots, typically that's where you have a sex doll body, but it can be paired with an animatronic head. So, it's still the body, the same body, but it's a head that might be able to move a little bit. Maybe it can blink or maybe it can talk. If often these will be paired with like AI, like a smartphone app or something like that. They're still very limited. Most of these dolls can't even stand, or so that we're not talking about dolls that like walk around or that kind of robot. It's more like some sort of very limited movement, some sort of automated sexual functions, or it could possibly moan in response to genital penetration or touching. So it's really very limited, but the robotic dolls are essentially a sex doll body paired with AI. So they have just very limited functioning, but some kind of illusion, I suppose, of interaction because they can, like I said, blink or move their mouth or talk a little bit or engage in some of those sexual motions. So it's still really limited. But what some of the doll companies do is they'll have a companion app. So you can use this app by itself, and it can be just a virtual AI that companion, quote unquote companion. It's really just for sex. That's the intention. But so you can use that by itself because a lot of men are just using AI girlfriends, just pulling out their phone and they have that kind of constant pornographic sex chat with an avatar that they've created, or that can be paired or partnered with the doll. So the personality from the phone app is connected to the doll. So really, in terms of sex robots, things are still very primitive. And I don't really say that we have sex robots yet, just because I think that kind of conjures up this image, this sort of sci-fi image of robots that kind of get up and walk around and do things. And I'm just like, it's not like that. It's still quite primitive. But I suppose we're also seeing now AI just in the last few years, even since I published my book nearly 3 years ago, AI and what can be done there in that sort of sex tech space is just really dramatically, it's exploding. And we're also seeing all these apps and websites to nudify and undress images of women, or the deepfake technology where you can swap faces and put women's faces on porn, and then like I said about the virtual girlfriend app, so men can even upload a photo. They call it a, what do they call it? Oh, I can't remember. There's a term for it, but basically they upload, no, sorry, a reference photo. So it's like you can upload a photo of a real woman, again, a woman that you know, and then that's how you build your AI virtual girlfriend and have sex chat going back and forth with that. So all of these things kind of exploding. It's a bit scary and hard to know where it's going to end up, but that's sort of the current state of affairs in terms of sex robots.
Right. And the manufacturing of these objects, these dolls, these robots sounds like it's probably happening with slave labor at the same time. And is it true that the robots are designed to facilitate rape fantasies?
Well, that's a good question because several years ago, one designer claimed to have made a sex robot. He said it was the world's first sex robot and that it came with multiple pre-programmed personalities. So the thing there is, I don't know there's actually any evidence the robot exists or was ever sold. But then that still begs the question, when you have pre-programmed personalities, can you program a rape setting? Because one of the personalities that he sort of marketed was named Frigid Farah. So the idea was this was a personality of a woman who didn't want to have sex. And the appeal for the user was this woman doesn't want to have sex and you're going to do it anyway. So it's that facilitation of rape fantasies and men being able to actually enact that. Then there's a question of when you have a doll that is not capable of consenting, that looks and functions and feels like a woman in every other way, but is essentially unconscious, if that again can just be used to facilitate the practice of rape again.
Oh my gosh, I feel so sad that this whole industry is even able to become more prevalent. Like the amount of disconnection internally to lower oneself to accepting that as their reality. I'm thinking of the men purchasing these things is just incredibly sad. You know, it's seriously, these people need help. So do the manufacturers. So does everyone trying to justify the existence of them. So a really important point from all of this, Caitlin, is that the theory that it prevents men from harming actual women and girls is false. Yeah.
That's right.
I'm personally here for the substance of this work and the research project, not for the likes. But if you want to see interesting and prominent speakers become part of this research, there are two things that you could do right now to help make that happen. First one is to follow the Tigress Path on Instagram or Spotify, and to leave a 5-star rating with a review if you can on Apple. These two things genuinely help so much to get this podcast and research on the radar of those who can help expand the conversation wider. And may we all be free from suffering.
It really is so extreme. From the time I spent on these online forums for men who own sex dolls, some of them, their doll had become this whole fantasy life. A lot of them, what they would do is they would dress up their doll, and the proof is they take photos and share them on the forum. So they would dress up their dolls, they would put their dolls in sort of lingerie or different costumes, and strip teases and things like that, and they'd take lots of photos. And it was this whole role play thing. It's like, oh, they'd give their doll a name. It's like, oh, this is Maria, and Maria thought she wanted to make me breakfast today, and here's Maria pose in the kitchen, and there's a piece of toast. They were just the delusion, the level of delusion here, or this fantasy play was so extreme. They would even, some of them, they would have their friend, sorry, they would have their doll uh, there was this kind of pretense that their doll was friends with one of the other guy online, one of his dolls, and the dolls would converse with each other. So one user I remember, he used to use pink font when he was writing as his doll. So it's like these whole imagined personalities of the doll. And you see photos, or here's me and my doll doing a workout. And it's like the doll in exercise gear, on a bench press. Or here's me and my doll, doing it. And it's all the activities. And it's like this whole fantasy world these men have constructed that they're so deeply invested in. And then there's the sexual side of that as well, where they're using their dolls to act out forms of sexualized torture and abuse. And again, documenting it all with photos and distributing it on an online forum of men who are welcoming this content and asking for more. I remember one guy, he detailed very detailed scenarios of rape and predation on his dolls. And he would have this scenario where he would break in during the night and it was the doll's house and how he would then sexually assault the doll and then the doll actually likes it in the end. It's this whole pornographic rape scenario. And these are the things that these men are acting out on their dolls. And they're sharing this with each other. And yeah, the things I saw in terms of sexualized abuse and torture acted out on female body dolls. These are the things that the men wanted to do to actual women, and they practice on their dolls. One man actually practiced tying up his doll. And then he said the first time, okay, that wasn't quite good enough. So maybe I have to do it tighter here and there. So what he wanted to do was to practice tying up this doll, this female body doll, and I think he said, to render her completely helpless. And he has a female body there to practice on. So some of these men were quite explicit that they were practicing on their dolls for sexual relations with actual women.
Yes, and so we'll say it again. There is actual evidence to prove that having these dolls and interacting with them in these rape fantasies and more does and has already led to actual assault and violence and sexual abuse, yeah, of women and girls.
Mm. And I think the other thing is when people make the argument, oh, it's better that these men enact rape and violence on a doll rather than a woman. Like the first thing is when these men are tying up a doll or raping or practicing this fantasy of rape or enacting violence on a doll, it's not preventing violence. They're still doing it. They're still perpetrating violence. They're
Yes,
practicing it on a real female body, that's someone that looks and feels like a woman, and it's usually finished followed with an orgasm. So it's reinforcing the behavior. So it's not actually preventing violence. It's just accommodating that violence and allowing them to practice the violence and
totally.
perfect.
The self-delusion, mental illness, it's got to be some kind of mental illness. This the self-hypnosis and the enabling of their disturbance that they're occupying in their mind, in their own world, is profiting from male misery and disconnection, which is an incredibly sad thing for the culture to be enabling. And are there also boy sex dolls?
There are male-bodied sex dolls, in the form of men. There's not so many of these because, like I said, it really is overwhelmingly female-bodied dolls. But the interesting thing about these dolls is, first of all, that there's not so many. There's no real female demand that is known, and the dolls are often marketed as gay. So they're still for men. So I remember researching a sex doll brothel was it Spain? Maybe it was Spain. And they had all the different categories, maybe it's like sort of blonde or whatever. And they had a gay category and there's a male doll in there. So there's still an understanding these are not for women. These male body dolls with penetrable orifices, they're still meant for men with penises. So even while a few male sex dolls exist, it's not because women are sort of going, oh, I want to go out there and get a corpse-like male sex doll to use. because that's not what's happening. It's men who are still looking for these products.
God help us all, seriously. And Caitlin, you've mentioned this term once in this episode, and I want to bring it up again because it's actually part of the subheading of your book. And you name women hating.
That's right.
And I want to encourage everyone right now to take a deep breath and actually face this reality instead of denying it, instead of defending against it, and just face this as starkly as you can, because this is the reality that's actually happening. And women like yourself and Melinda, who you work with, and so many others are, you're doing, I can feel your deep care for children, for women, for the future of humanity. I get that love is driving you and that you might have a preference, Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, to live your own life and not even have to know about this shit. And yet it's taken women like yourself to come forward to say, hey, everyone needs to listen to this. This is damn important. How can we help you in this mission? How can more people inform themselves, educate themselves, and actually help you in this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the first place to start would be support Collective Shout, support our work, whether that's hopping on social media if you're there and following or liking or signing up at our website, collectiveshout.org, or supporting financially if that's something, excuse me, that you'd like to do, but just helping us to keep doing this work and speaking out, just adding your voice to what we're doing. Right now, for example, we've just launched a campaign calling on Temu to get rid of child sex abuse dolls because, again, we've discovered these products on their platform. We've found disembodied child sex abuse doll heads. And we found these products last year and they got rid of them after we campaigned. And now we found them again, but instead of identifying them as sex doll heads, they're saying, oh, look at this wig holder or this model for practicing makeup or for hanging earrings or wearing hats. And we're like, these are the same disembodied heads that you can buy and pair with the same headless sex dolls that you have for sale. And we're even seeing the same child sex doll heads on other platforms marketed as sex dolls. So these companies, these platforms are trying to find sneaky ways to kind of get around these laws and get around things. So we're calling them out, we're trying to hold them accountable. And if we get enough pressure on them, then they do want to protect their reputation and they do want to act. So the way that people can help is by joining up, adding their voice, just speaking out on these things. If people are interested in the topic of sex dolls and robots, they can read my book if they don't mind being really depressed for a few hours. But they can learn more about what's going on. Yeah, just I suppose even just having those conversations in your own life, like just talking with the people in your life and calling out these things when you see them, just when you hear those arguments that these things are harmless or that it's actually good because it's preventing men from abusing children or whatever the arguments you're hearing, just potentially challenging that, just saying, well, but does it work like that? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So just disrupting that sort of dominant narrative that we're hearing, just calling it out, just asking questions. There's lots of ways people can do something to challenge this and to support those of us who are speaking out.
Yeah, and I want to say every single one of us can do something, of even just one of those options you've just described, Caitlin. And Collective Shout has been going for quite a while and has been doing really important work. How impactful is it to be receiving financial contributions?
Well, we rely on donations. So basically, if you like our work and want us to keep doing it, like financial donations, if you are able, are always really appreciated. But there are many ways to be involved and to spread the word and to help contribute. But that is always helpful because we don't have it, like I said, it is just donations. So we do as much as we possibly can. We do a lot with very little, and we're all kind of pushed to, breaking point all the time, or we're just taking on as much as we can because we do care so much and we really want to do this. And we will do this for free. But and we did do it for free for years as well. But yeah, so anything that people can do to contribute, whether that's financially or whether it's to get involved or even just to be on Facebook or Instagram or wherever it is and like or comment on posts, just anything to just sort of help get the word out there. It's all really helpful.
Yes, and I will include the links so people can see how they can get involved and how they can contribute. And like, I really believe, Caitlin, like, why is it so many women that are leading the charge with such important issues that are about addressing such disturbance in male behavior? And there's so many complaints about feminists, and it's like, I don't know about you, but I would prefer feminism didn't exist. But it exists because misogyny exists and
Mm.
women hating exists. I'm sure a lot of us would all just love to be enjoying our personal lives as much as we possibly can and not waste any of our time and energy having to focus on these things. So if everyone did a little something, perhaps everyone can enjoy their lives a little bit more. Everyone can feel a little bit more security and safety for the future, for the future of boys and girls and the coming generations. Like, that's part of what this whole project is about. It's not just about taking care of ourselves right here and now in our adult relationships. It is that, but it's not only that. So thank you
Mm.
for everything that you have done and are doing, Caitlin, for the future of humanity. I just respect your path so much. And thank you for coming and meeting with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Devashi, for having me. It's been nice to just chat and like talk about some of these things and talk about what we can do and what how things just imagine how things could be a little bit different.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please do share it around on social media. And know that everyone is invited to be part of our research in the anonymous survey. Your contribution will help reveal the exact ways men and women can live beyond patriarchal sex and find greater harmony together. You can find the link to our survey and also details on the Tigress Path for Women via thetigresspath.com.